You made a speech at the European Parliament, which were depicted by some European media as explosive, because some of the points that you made there seem to be unconventional compared with some other, or the mainstream voices, the so-called mainstream voices of Europe. For example, during the speech, you stated, China is not an enemy. China is just a success story, and that is why it is viewed by the United States as an enemy. So, Professor, why do you think it is important China to be viewed as a success story rather than an adversary?
What happened in the United States is quite clear. When the Soviet Union ended in December 1991, the U.S. looked around, and by U.S. I mean the leaders. This is the politicians, not the general public, but the politicians looked around and said, oh, we run the world now. We're the last ones. No Soviet Union. China, that's poor rice-growing villages. They didn't even imagine anything about China's development. They looked at the rest of the world, it's us. And they took the mindset, now we run the world. And in the 1990s, they used many expressions. The most famous became what our then Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, said, we are the indispensable country. Well, a little arrogant, actually. You know, everybody's indispensable. Why just 4% of the world population is the indispensable country? This went to America's head. American leaders took it for granted. They could pretty much do what they want. They could decide to expand their militaries if they wanted to. They could overthrow governments if they wanted to. They could go to war, for example, in Iraq if they wanted to. Other countries were saying, that's not a good idea, don't do that. But the United States wasn't listening. When in 2003, for example, the U.S. said, we need to attack Iraq because of weapons of mass destruction, the rest of the world, including China and, of course, Russia and Germany at the time, said, but wait a minute, we don't find weapons of mass destruction. We don't even know. Let's continue the inspections. And the United States said, no, we do what we want. And they went to war. Of course, it was on false pretenses, not just wrong pretenses. We now know it was filled with lies. But they felt the ability to go to war on the basis of lies and that they would make it up in the narrative. That is the mindset that got the U.S. into so much trouble. Now, China. Where does China fit into this? Well, as the U.S. was boasting about its world leadership and being indispensable, China just kept growing. China's not a threat. Talk to China, come to China, work with China, negotiate with China, have diplomacy. And then the threat isn't there, then the possibility of mutual benefit is there.
And also, since taking office, the Trump administration has imposed tariffs on countries including China, the European Union, Mexico, Canada, etc. And you have said that those policies are bound to fail. Why so?
Protectionism doesn't work to spur innovation and advance. Protectionism makes companies protected behind artificial barriers, but it typically makes them a little bit lazy. They compete in their home market, but then they can't really compete in the international markets. So if the US and Europe put on protectionist barriers, say against electric vehicles, which is what they want to do, yes, the U.S. will have an electric vehicle industry, but who's going to sell electric vehicles all over the world? It's not going to be high-cost American companies, it's going to be China.
And as we know, China-U.S. relations is one of the most important bilateral relations worldwide, given the ongoing frictions between the two nations. What might be essential to navigate these complexities between our two nations?
The hardest part right now is that President Trump and the Trump administration is very unstable in its policies. We have a policy in the morning, a different policy in the afternoon, and a third policy at night. China operates in a completely different way. China has a long-term plan, five-year plan.
And even four, yes, even longer.
And it's very systematic, and it's a very complex, big operating system. So one side's improvising, the other side is on a long-term path. I'm hoping the United States can actually turn to longer-term thinking and to diplomacy and negotiation with China rather than this unilateralism and this improvisation. I'm not too optimistic, but that's what we should have.
Professor, you've also maybe noticed that for so many years on the global arena, there are a lot of false narratives about China, its approach towards governance and development. For instance, the economic performance. When China grew at a rate of double-digit rate, there are critical voices saying it is not sustainable. And now China's economy is stabilizing at a rate of around 5%. There are voices saying it's weakening. Why do you think there this kind of consistent narratives existed for so many years? And what might be the helpful countermeasures to deal with that?
There are two reasons for that narrative. One is wishful thinking in the West from an ironic point of view, because the West is not interested in China's success, it's interested in Western dominance. It's a wrong idea, but that's the idea. And the other is a lack of firsthand knowledge. And so these narratives get repeated by people who don't know what they're talking about. So my advice is stop writing about what you don't know about. Go visit China. Go visit Western China. Go visit Central China. Go to Shenzhen. Go to Shanghai. Go to Shandong. You'll see amazing developments. You will see an economy that is extremely vibrant, that's extremely exciting, and it will give a different mindset. So I say to Americans, go visit. You'll see with your own eyes.
One of your key research areas is poverty alleviation, and you have a book titled The End of Poverty, and you have also called China's eradication of absolute poverty a great historic accomplishment. So what are some of the lessons here in China, because you've been to many small villages here, that you think might be helpful to other countries around the world?
China went from being a poor country in 1980 to ending poverty in 2020. It's a roadmap. It's a roadmap for Africa, incidentally, which I explain all the time in the African context. First, Africa should be unified because it's also 1.4 billion people. So if it acts as a true union, then it can emulate the roadmap of China. China was a high saving, high investing, well-planned economy for 40 years with market forces and government strategy and planning, big investments in infrastructure, big investments in education. And that's the basic roadmap that Africa too should take to eliminate poverty.
You're a critic of U.S. hegemony and also support for China's approach of development and governance has made you more or less a controversial figure in the West. Are you concerned, Professor, that this kind of negative perception of you might influence the public's understanding of you as well as your research?
Well, my job is to try to explain as clearly as I can, as accurate as I can, what my research findings, my understanding of history, my experience in Asia, in Europe, in the United States, Latin America, Africa. I've worked all over the world in about 150 countries. So I'm trying to share that knowledge and doing the best I can to explain my point of view.
During the speech, you also expressed your deep concern on where Europe is heading, quoting a very famous adage from Henry Kissinger that to be an enemy of the United States is dangerous, to be a friend is fatal. So, Professor, why do you think it is vital for Europe to adopt a real and more independent foreign policy, especially at this defining moment?
One basic point for Europe is we're living in a world where economies of scale and economies of scope in the economy are very important. In other words, you have to be big to be able to be at the center of some of these new crucial technologies and crucial innovations. And China and the US are big, they're unified, they're in the forefront of artificial intelligence, in the forefront of the digital age, in the forefront of many technologies. Where is Europe right now? It's got great scientists, it's got great universities, but it's a no-show when it comes to some of these key sectors. You don't have a leading European AI, for example. There's no European DeepSeek, there's no European OpenAI, there's no European tech giant, actually. Very strange. A lot of major companies came from Europe, but the U.S. grabbed them, brought them into the U.S. ecosystem. Even the world's leading producer of the advanced semiconductors, the extreme ultraviolet technology lithography, is a Dutch company, ASML, but it operates essentially in the U.S. political space. The U.S. decides where ASML exports it to stop exports to China. That's not the Netherlands or the European Union deciding these things. That's the United States deciding these things. So Europe gave up its strategic autonomy, and by remaining too divided among the 27 members of the European Union, Europe has to act like a unity. Europe is 450 million together. It's a $20 trillion economy. If Europe acts like a unity, that's a big player. But right now it doesn't act that way. It has been for 30 years, of course, under the U.S. thumb. U.S. has determined the foreign policy. U.S. has determined the security policy. U.S. has determined when the West goes to war or doesn't go to war. Europe's had no say. Interestingly, just an example, in 2008, the U.S. said NATO should enlarge to Ukraine. This was very provocative. If I would use a technical term, I'd say very stupid, because it was the way to war, obviously. Many diplomats knew that. The Europeans knew that. I've talked to many European leaders. Even at the time, they said, "What is your president doing? That's so provocative." The EU is more people than the United States. It's 27 countries, but they can't find their voice to the US. So I said in the parliament, get your act together. Act like a union. Don't be pulled to pieces. It's a little tricky for them for many reasons. Their constitution of the European Union, which doesn't formally exist, it's a treaty base, makes the union too weak. They operate with unanimity. They're a weak confederation, not really a union, and it doesn't serve for Europe to play its role in the world properly. Can they get their act together? Can they unify? Can they act in a straightforward way? They're very confused. They're very divided. They don't understand diplomacy because they forgot it for a long time. They don't understand Russia. It's not a simple situation, but I'm hoping that they pull together. It's a wonderful part of the world. They ought to get their act together.